Garrett Holloway was accustomed to noticing details. This quality, honed over years of working as a mechanic at Excelsior Engineering in Hudsonville, made him an indispensable specialist in the shop. Any deviation in the engine's performance, an unusual sound from the gears, or a misaligned part, nothing escaped his watchful eye. His co-workers often joked that Garrett could hear a machine malfunction before it happened. He didn't argue, just smiled with the corners of his mouth, wiping his hands on a rag. The same observant gaze that allowed him to identify a malfunction in a mechanism before it led to a breakdown now noticed changes in his own family life. And these changes worried him more and more. That evening, Garrett sat in the kitchen of the modest two-story house on Oak Street that he and Avelina had bought 3 years ago, 2 years after their wedding. Dinner was cooling on the table in front of him, and the hands of the wall clock showed that it was almost 9 o'clock. Avelina was supposed to be back from her shift at the hospital around 6. He checked his phone. No messages, no missed calls. Leaning back in his chair, Garrett absent-mindedly ran his fingers over the scar on his left arm, a reminder of his first meeting with his future wife. They had met in the emergency room at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, where he had been taken after an accident at the factory. Aveline Pierce, a young nurse with red hair and an unexpectedly loud laugh, was treating his wound. Her quick, confident movements were mesmerizing, and the sparkle in her green eyes made him forget the pain. "Do you always look at people so intently, Mr. Holloway?" she asked as she secured the bandage. "Only those who deserve it," he replied, surprised at his own boldness. A week later they met at a cafe, and a month later Garrett couldn't imagine his life without this unpredictable woman who brought color and spontaneity to his measured existence, something he had always lacked. The first years of marriage were filled with happiness and discoveries. Avelina, with her impulsive nature and love of change, taught him to enjoy the little things: impromptu picnics at sunset, spontaneous weekend trips, dancing in the rain. She liked to say that life was too short to be cautious, and she convinced him to step outside his comfort zone. In turn, Garrett brought stability and reliability to her life. He was the anchor that held her steady during emotional storms, the compass that helped her find her way when she was lost in her own desires and aspirations. Together they created a cozy home with a collection of old vinyl records in the living room and a garden behind the house where Avelina grew herbs for her culinary experiments. And even though the photos on their walls didn't show exotic trips, just simple joys like barbecues with neighbors, trips to the local park and the fair in downtown Hudsonville, that was their happiness, real and warm. The sound of the key turning in the lock brought Garrett back to the present. He glanced at his watch. It was 9:15 p.m. The door opened and he heard Avelina's light footsteps in the hallway. "I'm home." Her voice sounded tired. "I'm in the kitchen," Garrett replied, straightening up and trying not to betray his tension. Avelina appeared in the doorway, still as beautiful as ever, but now with a strange aloofness about her. She nodded briefly to her husband and headed for the refrigerator. "Sorry I'm late. It was a crazy day at the hospital. I had to stay late." Garrett nodded, watching her take out a bottle of water. On her wrist he noticed a bracelet he hadn't seen before, a thin silver chain with a small pendant. "New bracelet?" he asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. Aveline froze for a split second, then shrugged. "A patient gave it to me. I guess she appreciates the attention." "I made lasagna," he said, nodding toward the cooling dish. "Your favorite, with eggplant." "Thank you, but I'm not hungry," Avelina said, placing her glass on the counter. "I had a snack in the cafeteria with my colleagues. She always used to let him know if she wasn't eating dinner at home." Garrett felt a sense of unease growing inside him, the same feeling he got before a serious piece of equipment broke down. "Can you at least sit with me?" he suggested. "We've hardly spoken all week." Avelina sighed, and the sound grated on his ears. There was more irritation than fatigue in it. "Gar, I'm really tired. My head is splitting. I just want to take a shower and go to bed." She moved closer and mechanically touched his shoulder, a gesture that had once been full of warmth but had now become a formality. Without waiting for a reply, she left the kitchen. A minute later, he heard the sound of running water upstairs. Garrett slowly put the lasagna back in the refrigerator, wondering how long ago this estrangement had begun. A month ago? 2? He couldn't pinpoint exactly when their cozy evenings had turned into a silent coexistence under the same roof. At first, there were small changes. Avelina started staying late at work more often and calling less during the day. Then came the unscheduled shifts and get-togethers with colleagues that weren't mentioned in advance. She stopped sharing funny stories about her patients or complaining about her head nurse Lorraine, whom she used to call the witch in a white coat. Going upstairs, Garrett walked into the bedroom. Avelina was still in the shower. Her phone was on the bedside table, screen down, another new habit. She had never hidden her phone before, and often asked him to check her messages if she was busy cooking or video chatting with her mother. The phone vibrated, the screen lit up, displaying a notification. Garrett glanced involuntarily at the display. "Colton, already missing you. Can't wait for the next." The end of the message was hidden by the edge of the screen, but his heart already tightened with a vague sense of foreboding. Who was Colton? Why was he texting his wife late at night? And what exactly was he looking forward to? The bathroom door opened, and Garrett quickly looked away from his phone. Aveline entered, wrapped in a large towel, her hair damp. She froze when she noticed him looking at her phone, and her face tensed. "What are you doing?" Her voice sounded sharper than usual. "Nothing," Garrett replied, trying to sound calm. "Just waiting for you to get out of the bathroom." She quickly walked over to the nightstand and picked up her phone, checking the screen. Her shoulders relaxed noticeably when she saw that the device was locked. "Sorry," she said, softening. "It's just confidential patient information. I didn't want you to see it by accident." Garrett nodded, not believing a word of it. In the 5 years they had been together, Avelina had never mentioned that she kept patient data on her personal phone. What's more, she had always emphasized that it was strictly against hospital policy. "Of course, I understand," he said, and headed for the bathroom, feeling the rift between them widen. Over the next few weeks, the situation only got worse. Avelina came home later and later, often smelling of perfumes Garrett didn't recognize, and once he noticed a faint mark on her neck that looked too much like a kiss mark. When he tried to talk about what was going on between them, she snapped at him, accusing him of being paranoid, overly suspicious, and even trying to control her. "You've become so suffocating," she blurted out during one of these conversations, and the words hurt his pride. Garrett began to notice that she was increasingly locking herself in the bathroom with her phone, and when she thought he wasn't looking, she would smile at the screen with a tenderness she hadn't shown him in a long time. He tried to convince himself that he was just overreacting, that his analytical mind was seeing problems where there weren't any. But the more he watched, the stronger his conviction grew. Something was going on, something serious. On Tuesday evening, a month and a half after these strange changes began, Garrett came home earlier than usual. There had been a short circuit at the factory, and the entire second shift had been sent home. He hoped to find Avelina at home. She had said she would finish her shift at 2 in the afternoon. The house was silent. After checking the bedroom and kitchen, Garrett was sure his wife wasn't there. He dialed her number, but the phone went straight to voicemail. Fighting the urge to panic or get angry, he decided to make himself some tea and wait. Maybe she had been held up at the hospital, or maybe she had stopped by a friend. He was finishing his second cup when he heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, Garrett saw Avelina getting out of an unfamiliar silver sedan. The driver, a man whose face he couldn't make out, waved to her and drove away. Avelina entered the house with bags from the grocery store, humming to herself. Seeing her husband in the kitchen, she started, "Garrett, you scared me. Why are you home so early?" "Power outage at the factory," he replied, watching her reaction. "And you decided to go shopping after your shift?" Avelina nodded, starting to unpack the groceries. "Yes, I wanted to make something special for dinner." "Who gave you a ride?" Garrett asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Avelina froze for a second, then continued unpacking the groceries. "The new doctor from the pediatric ward. He lives somewhere around here and offered to give me a ride when he saw me with my bags at the bus stop." "What's his name?" "What?" She didn't even turn toward him. "The doctor. What's his name?" "Alan. Or Alex. I don't remember." She shrugged with feigned indifference, but Garrett noticed how her fingers tightened around the can of tomatoes. "That's strange," he said, getting up from the chair. "I thought you seemed very familiar with him. You waved goodbye to him so happily." "God, Garrett, it's called politeness." Aveline turned sharply toward him, her eyes flashing with irritation. "What's been going on with you lately? Are you following me? Checking up on me? I'm not your property." Garrett felt a wave of bitterness rise within him. Instead of explaining herself, she went on the offensive, painting him as a jealous tyrant. "I just asked, Aveline. Isn't it normal to be interested in who my wife is talking to?" "It's normal when it's normal interest, not an interrogation," she snapped. "I'm sorry, but I don't have the energy for this. I've had a difficult day." With that, she left the kitchen, leaving the grocery bags on the table. Garrett heard her climb the stairs, then slam the bedroom door. He slowly sank into a chair, feeling devastated. Something in their relationship had broken, and he didn't know how to fix it. The constant excuses, the secrecy, the irritation, everything pointed to Avelina hiding. The evening passed in tense silence. They ate dinner separately, Avelina in her bedroom with a tray she had prepared for herself, and Garrett in the kitchen picking listlessly at the reheated leftovers from last night's dinner. When he went upstairs, she was already pretending to be asleep, turned away toward the wall. Garrett lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how far they had grown apart over the past few weeks. In the morning, when he woke up, Aveline was already dressed and getting ready to leave. "I'll be late today," she said, zipping her bag. "We have a staff meeting after my shift." Garrett nodded, unable to find the strength to argue or ask for details. She had almost left the bedroom when she suddenly stopped and turned to him. He propped himself up on his elbow, surprised by this unexpected suggestion. "Go somewhere?" "Where?" "I don't know." She shrugged, but there was a strange gleam in her eyes. "Maybe take a train to the mountains. There's a new resort in Blue Ridge. They say it's really beautiful. We could spend a week there, take a break from work, from everything, reconnect." Garrett looked at her intently, trying to understand what was behind this sudden suggestion. Just yesterday she could barely stand his presence, and now she wanted to spend a whole week together? "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," she smiled, and for a moment he saw the old Aveline, spontaneous, cheerful, adventurous. "What do you say? I can take next week off. We'll get away from all this routine." As if spellbound, Garrett nodded. "Okay, let's go." "Great." Her smile widened. "I'll book the train tickets and a hotel room. See you tonight." She left, leaving him confused. Something about her behavior alarmed him, but at the same time, hope flickered in his heart. Maybe she also felt that they were drifting apart and sincerely wanted to fix things. Garrett got up from the bed and walked over to the window. Avelina was just getting into her car. Before starting the engine, she took out her phone, quickly typed a message, and smiled broadly at the screen. The hope in his heart faded, giving way to anxiety. But the decision had been made. They would go to the resort. And maybe there he would finally understand what was happening to Hudsonville Station greeted them with a damp morning and a buzz of voices. Garrett rolled a small suitcase along the platform, Avelina walking beside him, clutching their tickets and boarding passes in her hand. The train to the mountain resort of Blue Ridge was already at the platform, a long silver train with windows glistening with morning dew. Over the past week, Avelina had become noticeably more animated, smiling more often, and even initiating conversation several times at dinner. She talked enthusiastically about the resort, showed photos on her phone, and discussed what excursions they could go on. These changes filled Garrett with cautious optimism. Perhaps he really had exaggerated the problems between them. "That's our car," Avelina pointed to the third from the end. "Compartment number 21. They climbed the steps, and the conductor, after checking their tickets, showed them to their compartment. Small but cozy, with 2 seats separated by a table, it resembled a miniature hotel room. The wall-to-wall window promised picturesque views during the 6-hour trip. "Looks nice," Garrett said, looking around the compartment and placing their suitcases on the top shelf. Avelina nodded, settling down by the window. She took a book out of her bag and immersed herself in reading. Garrett sat down opposite her, watching her face as she concentrated on the pages. Her red hair, pulled back into a casual bun, trembled slightly with the steady vibration of the train as it began to move. Garrett tried to remember the last time he had seen his wife so relaxed in his presence. "I'm glad we decided to take this trip," he said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Avelina looked up from her book and smiled. Not the wide, open smile he loved so much, but a more reserved one, as if she were trying not to show too much emotion. "Me too," she replied. "We both needed a change of scenery." "Do you remember our first trip together?" Garrett asked, trying to find a thread of memories that might bring them back to their former closeness. "That camping trip at Cascade Lake?" She chuckled, but a spark of warmth flashed in her eyes. "How could I forget? You almost broke our tent, and then we spent the whole night listening to a raccoon trying to get to our food. And you made me get out of my sleeping bag and chase it away," Garrett added, feeling the first semblance of a real conversation in a long time warm him from the inside. "I've been afraid of raccoons since I was a kid," Avelina admitted. "My brother told me scary stories about how they can chew through tents and attack people while they're sleeping." "I know," Garrett nodded. "You told me. That's why I went out into the dark with a flashlight." They exchanged smiles, and for a moment, an invisible spark of former understanding seemed to pass between them. But then Avelina's phone vibrated, and she glanced at the screen and visibly tensed. "Everything okay?" Garrett asked. "Yes, just a message from work," she said, putting her phone face down. "Nothing urgent." The conversation trailed off again. Avelina returned to her reading, and Garrett took the mechanics magazine he had brought for the trip out of his bag. However, he couldn't concentrate on the articles. His gaze kept returning to his wife, who seemed lost in her own thoughts. "I'm going to the dining car for some coffee," she said, getting up. "Would you like anything?" "I can get it myself," Garrett offered, also standing up. "No, stay here," she waved him away. "I'll be quick. Cappuccino as usual?" "Yes, thank you." She left the compartment, leaving her bag on the seat. Garrett noticed that she had taken her phone with her. He leaned back in his seat and looked out the window at the hills passing by, already beginning to take on golden autumn hues. Everything will be fine, he assured himself. We just need time to work things out. 20 minutes, he decided to go out into the corridor. Perhaps she had met someone she knew or just decided to take a stroll through the train. As Garrett walked through the next car, he saw the conductor. "Excuse me," he said. "Have you seen a woman with red hair, wearing a green sweater?" "My wife went to get some coffee, but she's been gone a long time." "There were several red-haired female passengers in the dining car," replied the conductor. "All I can say is that it's open and serving." Garrett nodded and moved on. Opening the door to the dining car, he glanced around the room. Passengers were sitting at tables, talking, drinking coffee, and eating breakfast. Aveline was not among them. He approached the counter. "Was there a woman with red hair and a bun wearing a green sweater? She wanted to buy coffee." The barista shrugged. "A lot of people come in for coffee. I don't remember everyone." Disappointed, Garrett turned to leave when something caught his eye. In the far corner of the car, at a table partially hidden by a partition, a strand of red hair flashed. He slowly approached and froze, shocked by what he saw. Aveline was sitting at a table with a man. He was tall, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in an expensive-looking dark blue sweater. They sat very close together, their shoulders almost touching, and were talking animatedly about something. There were cups of coffee on the table in front of them, which they seemed to have barely touched, completely absorbed in their conversation. He stepped back behind the partition, feeling his heart pound in his chest. So that's what had been going on all these months. That's why she was always staying late. That's who was texting her in the evenings. That's why she had been acting so strange. Betrayal. Such a banal, predictable reason. Garrett didn't know what to do. His first instinct was to go over to them, make a scene, demand an explanation. But something held him back. Perhaps it was a professional habit to gather all the facts before acting. He took his phone out of his pocket and, trying to remain unnoticed, pointed the camera at their table. They were still talking, completely absorbed in each other. And then he saw Avelina gently touch the man's face and kiss him, not fleetingly or in a friendly manner, but slowly, with a clear passion she hadn't shown him in a long time. Garrett pressed record. His hands were shaking slightly, but he forced himself to hold the phone steady. Every second of the video was like a stab in the gut, but he kept filming, feeling strangely numb. It was as if it wasn't happening to him, but to someone else. Avelina pulled away from the man, but their faces remained close. They smiled at each other, sharing some kind of secret. Garrett stopped recording and moved even further away. Now that the initial shock had begun to wear off, his analytical mind kicked back in. Something about this man seemed familiar. Garrett racked his brain, trying to remember where he might have seen him before. Then it dawned on him: the train station. This man had boarded the train with a woman, a blonde with her hair pulled back. They looked like a couple, holding hands and putting their luggage. He decided to find this woman. Perhaps she also deserved to know the truth. Perhaps this was the only way to stop what was happening before his eyes. Garrett began methodically going through the train car after car, carefully studying the faces of the passengers. Passing by compartments with open doors, he peered into the spaces between the seats. His search lasted almost an hour until finally, in the third car from the end, he saw her. The blonde woman was sitting alone, reading a book. She had a focused expression on her face, her eyebrows slightly furrowed as if the contents of the book demanded her full attention. She seemed immersed in her own world, unaware of what was happening a few cars away. But the woman noticed him and looked up from her book. "Can I help you?" she asked, a hint of irritation in her voice at being interrupted. Garrett silently handed her the phone with the video open. She took the device with a puzzled expression on her face, which quickly turned to shock when she saw what was happening on the screen. Her face paled, her breathing became ragged. She watched the video to the end, her eyes glued to the screen, then slowly looked up at Garrett. "What a bastard," she said bitterly. Silence fell. They looked at each other, united by a common betrayal, two strangers whose lives had been destroyed in the same moment. "Is he your husband?" Garrett finally asked. "Yes," the woman straightened up, as if gathering the last The woman nodded, as if this information explained something. Then she handed the phone back. "Thank you for showing me. I had a feeling something was going on. Long phone calls when you were alone, sudden business trips, client meetings on weekends." She fell silent abruptly, as if realizing she was sharing too much personal information with a stranger. Garrett took the phone, feeling strangely calm. Now that the facts were out in the open, with no room left for doubt or self-deception, he knew what he had to do. "What are you going to do?" the woman asked. "I don't know yet," he replied honestly. "What about you?" She shook her head. "I need to think, but I'm definitely not going to keep pretending that nothing is happening." Garrett nodded, understanding her feelings. He too could no longer, and would no longer turn a blind eye to the betrayal. "Good luck," he said, turning away. Garrett returned to his compartment. He sat down by the window, staring at his phone with the video he had recorded. Time passed, but Avelina did not return. Almost 2 hours had passed since she had left for coffee. Finally, the compartment door opened and she entered with a slight blush on her cheeks, her hair slightly disheveled and without a single cup of coffee in her hands. "Sorry I'm late," she said with a forced smile. "I ran into a nurse I know from another ward and we got to talking." Garrett stared at her silently, noting how easily the lie rolled off her lips, the same lips that had recently kissed another man. "Is something wrong?" Avelina asked, noticing his gaze. Instead of answering, Garrett pressed play on his phone and handed it to her. She froze in the doorway, staring at the screen. As she watched the video, her face changed. First shock, then panic, then an attempt to maintain a neutral expression. When the video ended, she stood silently for a few seconds, gathering her thoughts. "It's not what you think," she finally said, closing the compartment door behind her. "I don't even know this man. He sat down next to me, started a conversation, offered me wine. I drank too much. You know I can't drink. And it was a mistake. I swear to God it was a mistake. I was confused, weak. It doesn't mean anything." Garrett listened to her, maintaining the same calmness that had not left him since the opening scene. His face remained serious, his eyes full of quiet pain. "We're getting off at..." Aveline crossed her arms over her chest, her voice rising slightly. "Home? Are you crazy? We paid for a week at the resort. I'm not throwing that money away because of a mistake I already admitted to. If you want to go back, please do." "I'm getting out, taking a shuttle and enjoying what we paid for." Garrett took a deep breath. He didn't answer. He just sat there silently until the train pulled into the next station. As soon as it stopped, he stood up, grabbed his suitcase, and got out of the compartment. Avelina remained seated, staring out the window, not moving. But when Garrett stepped onto the platform, he noticed something curious. A couple was also getting off, clearly in a tense relationship. The woman was talking loudly, pointing her finger at the man. It was the same blonde woman he had shown the video to. The man, visibly embarrassed, was the same man who had been with Avelina in the dining car hours earlier. Their confrontation was intense. The woman demanded an explanation. The man tried to. The taxi crawled slowly through the evening streets of Hudsonville. Garrett stared out the window, unable to distinguish the houses and trees merging into a blur. His mind was strangely clear, that rare moment of absolute understanding when all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place and you finally see the whole picture. The driver tried several times to strike up a conversation, but Garrett responded with monosyllables and eventually gave up. When the taxi stopped at the house on Oak Street, Garrett paid silently, including a generous tip, and got out with his suitcase. The house greeted him with silence and the scent of lavender. Aveline had always loved scented candles. He dropped his suitcase in the hallway and walked into the living room without turning on the lights. He sat down on the sofa and glanced around the room, which had been their shared space that morning but now seemed like the set of a play in which he was unwittingly. Their photos together on the shelves, the curtains they had chosen together, the blanket they used to watch movies under while cuddling. It all now looked fake, like props in a bad movie about happy family life. Garrett didn't know how long he sat there in the dark, sorting through memories and rethinking the last few months. At what point had their marriage begun to fall apart? Was it his fault? What had he done or not done that made Avelina turn her attention to someone else? Morning found him in the same position, sitting on the couch with his phone in his hand. He had hardly slept, but he didn't feel tired. The mechanism inside him that always kicked in when equipment broke down at the factory, cold, calculating, methodical, was now working at full capacity, analyzing the situation and developing a plan of action. Avelina had betrayed him. She hadn't just emotionally distanced herself or become confused about her feelings. She had consciously and deliberately deceived him for weeks, maybe even months. She had planned meetings behind his back, lied to his face, and even this trip, which was supposed to help their relationship, turned out to be just a cover for a meeting with her lover. Garrett took a deep breath and made a decision. He would protect himself, financially, legally, emotionally. First, he called the factory and said he was taking a few days off for personal reasons. Then he opened his laptop and got to work. Their finances were mostly separate. They each had their own personal accounts where their salaries were deposited, but they also had a joint account for mortgage payments, utilities, and large joint purchases. In addition, Avelina had a credit card linked to his main account. He had added her as an additional card holder more than 4 years ago when they first got married. Garrett logged into his bank account and discovered that over the past 2 months, there had been strange charges on Avelina's credit card, expensive restaurants, purchases at clothing stores she had never mentioned before, and hotel rooms in the city center on days when she was supposedly on call. And almost every one of these purchases was made on days when she came home late or said she was working late. Clenching his jaw, Garrett blocked her credit card. Then he transferred half of the money from their joint account to his personal account, leaving just enough to cover their current bills. He then changed the passwords to all of his online banking accounts, his email, and any other accounts. His next step was to call his friend Lance Radford, who worked as a family lawyer at a small law firm in Hudsonville. After a brief greeting and exchange of pleasantries, Garrett got down to business. "Lance, I need your professional help. I'm getting divorced." There was a short pause on the other end of the line. "Gar, I don't know what to say. You and Avelina seemed like such a strong couple." "We seemed," Garrett replied dryly. "Can I come by your office today? I want to get started on the process as soon as possible." "Sure. Come by the office around 2. I'll have a window between meetings." After the conversation, Garrett called a locksmith and scheduled them to come the next day. The house belonged to him. He had inherited it from his parents, who had moved to Florida 3 years ago, and Avelina had no legal claim to it. They had never registered it as joint property, although they had discussed it from time to time. He also made a list of all the items and property they had acquired together, noting what had been purchased with his money, what had been purchased with hers, and what had been purchased together. Then he began to pack Avelina's things, methodically and carefully folding clothes. The work distracted him from his heavy thoughts and gave him a sense of control that he had been deprived of in recent months. When her things were packed, he took the boxes to the garage and placed them next to her car, which remained at home. They took a taxi to the train station, as parking there was too expensive for long-term storage. The whole day passed in a flurry of business. The meeting with Lance turned out to be productive. His friend didn't ask any unnecessary questions, just clarified a couple of details and began preparing the necessary documents. Garrett showed him the video from the train, and Lance shook his head. "With that kind of evidence, she won't have a chance to contest it. It's clear adultery." By evening, Garrett felt his strength beginning to leave him. He ordered pizza, having neither the desire nor the energy to cook, and after dinner, he took a shower. Standing under the hot water, he allowed himself to feel the pain fully for the first time. It wasn't anger, more a deep, exhausting sadness. Sadness for the years lost, for the trust that had been trampled on, for the dreams that would now never come true. He and Avelina had talked about children, about a bigger house somewhere outside the city, about traveling together when they had saved enough money. All those plans had now fallen apart like a house of cards. Garrett dried himself with a towel and stepped out of the bathroom. At that moment, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar but local. After hesitating for a second, he answered, "Garrett Holloway speaking." "Hi, Garrett, this is Mackenzie Ford, Avelina's friend." The voice on the other end of the line was deep and clear. "Sorry to bother you, but I can't get a hold of Avelina, and she said you were going to the resort together. Her phone is off, and I'm starting to worry." Garrett sat down on the edge of the bed. He knew Mackenzie only superficially, a tall, dark-skinned woman with short hair who worked with Avelina at the hospital. They had crossed paths a few times at joint dinners or hospital events. She seemed straightforward and practical. "We're not together, Mackenzie. I came home alone, and as far as I know, Avelina continued on to the resort. Something happened." There was a silence on the line. Then Mackenzie asked cautiously, "Can I ask what happened, or is it too personal?" Garrett thought for a moment. Sooner or later the truth would come out, and Aveline would most likely tell. "Did you know?" he asked bluntly. Another pause, then a quiet sigh. "I suspected. She started mentioning this Colton a lot, who she was supposedly consulting about a patient, but I never saw this doctor in our department. And then she canceled our meeting several times at the last minute, and when I happened to see her in town, she wasn't alone. Colton, the same name Garrett had seen in the text message notification on Avelina's phone a few weeks ago. So it really had been going on for a long time." "Thanks for your honesty," he said. "I appreciate it." "You know," Mackenzie continued after a short pause, "I always thought you were a good person, Garrett. Calm, reliable. I don't understand what's gotten into her." "Me neither," he replied quietly. "Listen, if Avelina does get in touch with you, don't tell her we talked, okay? I don't want her to know I'm talking about our problems." "Of course," Mackenzie replied confidently. What we say stays between us. And Garrett, take care of yourself. Whatever happens, remember that you deserve better. After talking to Mackenzie, Garrett felt a strange sense of relief. The fact that someone close to Avelina also saw inconsistencies in her behavior seemed to confirm that he hadn't imagined the problem. It was real. That night was the first in a long time that he slept soundly, without painful awakenings or heavy thoughts. He woke up before his alarm, rested and with a strange feeling of lightness, as if the heavy burden he had been carrying on his shoulders for the last few months had finally begun to lessen. Garrett made coffee, drank it slowly, enjoying the silence of the house and thinking about his next steps. Just yesterday, he had called his parents in Florida and briefly told them about the breakup, without going into details. His mother was predictably upset. She had always liked Aveline, but his father just sighed and said, "If you're sure, son, then go for it." His father may not have been a brilliant mechanic like him, but he was good with people. For 30 years, he had managed a small team at the same factory where Garrett now worked, and he always said that managing people was more difficult than fixing machines. With technology, there's always a logical reason for something to break, but people sometimes break for no reason at all. At 10 o'clock, the locksmiths arrived. The job took less than an hour. 2 new door locks with a completely different type of key, which Avelina definitely didn't have. While the locksmiths worked, Garrett sat in the kitchen looking through the divorce papers Lance had printed out. Everything looked standard and straightforward. In Ohio, divorce on the grounds of adultery did not require a long period of separation, and with the evidence he had, the process should be quick and uncomplicated. After the locksmiths left, Garrett checked all the locks, made sure the keys worked properly, and went back to his business. He made a list of everything that needed to be done. Pick up his personal belongings from the safe deposit box at the bank, check all joint accounts and insurance policies, make sure there were no legal obligations linking him to Avelina other than marriage. Deep down, he knew that this methodical approach and immersion in detail was his way of coping with the emotional turmoil. Every item crossed off the list, every account closed, every document prepared was a small victory, a step toward a new life without lies and betrayal. By evening, Garrett had finished all the preparations. He stood in the middle of the living room looking around the house, which now showed no signs of Avelina's presence. The photographs had been put away in a box. Her books had been taken from the shelves and stacked in one of the boxes in the garage, and even the kitchen cabinets had been reorganized so that there were no empty spaces left to remind him of her. This was no longer their home. It was his home. And although the wound of betrayal still stung inside, Garrett felt a growing confidence in his decision. He didn't deserve what Avelina had done to him. He deserved honesty, loyalty, and respect. And if he couldn't get that in his current marriage, then it was better to be alone than to live a lie. Garrett sat down on the sofa with a cup of tea, turned on the TV in the background, and picked up his phone. He didn't know exactly when Avelina would return from her trip to the resort, perhaps in a few days as originally planned, or maybe sooner if her lover had indeed left the train with his wife. In any case, he was ready. The divorce papers were in an envelope on the coffee table. The locks had been changed, his finances were secure, and his belongings were packed. All that remained was to wait and maintain the crystal clarity and determination that had come to him when he realized the truth. Garrett took a sip of tea and felt a strange calm for the first time in a long time. Not happiness, that was still a long way off, but a kind of liberation. It was as if he had been trying to see through a foggy window for a long time, and now it was finally clear, allowing him to see reality as it was. The doorbell rang on the fourth day after Garrett returned home. He was just finishing lunch and browsing the news on his tablet when he heard the insistent sound. Glancing at the clock, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He slowly got up and headed for the front door. Through the peephole, he saw Avelina, tired with disheveled hair, standing with a suitcase at the door. She looked exhausted but determined. Garrett took a deep breath and opened the door, remaining in the doorway. "Garrett, finally." Avelina tried to smile. "You didn't answer your phone." "I blocked your number," he replied calmly. Avelina looked him up and down as if trying to gauge his mood. Then she looked at the door lock, which was clearly different from the old one. "You changed the locks?" Her voice sounded incredulous. "Yes," Garrett nodded, still standing in the doorway, not inviting her in. Avelina shifted from foot to foot, nervously fixing her hair. Her gaze darted from Garrett's face to the door, to the path in front of the house, and back again. "Gar, listen, I understand that you're upset and you have every right to be. What happened on the train? It was a mistake. I really don't know this man and we've never met before. It was a moment of weakness, nothing more." Garrett watched her silently. Every word she said was a lie, but that was nothing new. He had grown accustomed to her deception over the past few months. Avelina, growing more nervous by the second due to his silence, continued. "I've thought everything through on the trip. You were right. We need to work on our relationship. I'm ready for that. We can start with a clean slate, maybe go to a marriage counselor." Instead of answering, Garrett took a white envelope out of his shirt pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, not understanding. "Divorce papers," he replied firmly. Avelina froze, staring at the envelope as if it might bite her. Then she slowly took it, but didn't open it. "You can't be serious. Because of one kiss? One stupid mistake? Garrett, 5 years of marriage is worth more than that. It's not about the kiss, Avelina. It's about the fact that you lied to me for months. Colton isn't some random man from a train, and you know that." At the mention of Colton's name, Aveline paled. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and something that looked like fear appeared in her eyes. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter," Garrett interrupted her. "I know enough. I checked the credit card statements linked to my account. You know what I found there? Restaurants, hotels, stores, all on days when you were supposedly at work or with your friends." Aveline suddenly changed tactics. Her face contorted into a grimace of hurt, her eyes filling with tears. "You were following me? Checking my expenses? That's invasion of privacy. You were controlling me like some kind of prison guard. No wonder I felt suffocated in this relationship." Garrett shook his head calmly. "No, Avelina. I only noticed the discrepancies after the train. You lied to me, cheated on me, and spent my money on your lover. And now that you've been caught, you're trying to make me the villain. It won't work. This beautiful big house with a pool was built with my parents' money," he continued. "They left it to me in their will. Not a single cent of your money went into it. You have no rights here." Avelina snorted, took a step forward, but stopped when she saw Garrett's unyielding gaze. "What about my things?" Avelina stood with her mouth open, unable to believe what was happening. "You can't do this to me. Throw me out of my house like some kind of— If you don't agree with something, have your lawyer contact mine," Garrett said curtly and closed the door. Through the living room window, he could see Avelina standing on the porch for a few more minutes, staring at the door. Then, slowly, As if in a daze, she walked to the garage, checked her car, which was filled with boxes, and got behind the wheel. Before driving away, she slammed the door and started the engine with such force that it seemed as if she wanted to punish the car for everything that had happened. Mackenzie Ford was surprised when she opened. "Garrett kicked me out of the house," Evelina replied, sinking onto the living room sofa. "He's completely lost his mind. He changed the locks, packed my things, and filed for divorce." Mackenzie slowly sat down opposite her, studying her friend's face intently. She already knew part of the story from Garrett, but decided to give Evelina a chance to tell her side. "Why did he do that?" she asked in a neutral tone. Evelina sighed, throwing her head back dramatically. "It's all because of one stupid misunderstanding. We went to this resort to work things out on the train. I met this guy, we started talking, had some wine, and he kissed me. Garrett saw it and blew it out of proportion. Can you believe that? 5 years of marriage, and he's willing to throw it all away over a kiss with a stranger." Mackenzie raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Evelina encouraged, and instead of talking, discussing everything, he just left. He left me alone. And when I came back, it turned out that he had blocked my cards, changed all my passwords, locks, as if I were some kind of criminal. "And you really didn't know this man before?" Mackenzie asked, looking her friend straight in the eye. Evelina hesitated for a moment, then quickly shook her head. "Of course not. He was just a random guy on the train. And his name isn't Colton." Evelina flinched, her eyes widening. "What? How did you—" "You've mentioned that name a lot in the last few months," Mackenzie replied calmly. "Every time you got a message from Dr. Colton, you smiled and lit up. But there's no Dr. Colton at our hospital." Evelina's face froze, then she lowered her eyes. "Okay, I knew him, but it was still a mistake. Garrett and I grew apart. He's always at work and never interested in what I'm doing." "Evelina," Mackenzie interrupted her tirade, "I know Garrett. He's an attentive, caring man. Don't try to blame him. If you cheated on him, at least admit it to yourself." Evelina opened her mouth to argue, but seeing her friend's determined gaze, she just sighed. "It doesn't matter. I need a place to stay until I find a new place. Can I stay with you?" Mackenzie hesitated, then nodded. "You can stay on the couch, but only temporarily until you find a place of your own. And no stories about evil Garrett ruining your life, okay? I'm not going to listen to that." The following weeks were a strange transition period for Garrett. He returned to work, where his colleagues, noticing the absence of his wedding ring, preferred not to ask questions. His silence and focus on work were enough to signal that personal topics were best left alone. The divorce proceedings moved surprisingly smoothly. Lance, his lawyer, reported that Evelina had hired a representative but was not contesting the basic terms. She agreed to a quick settlement, demanding only a certain amount from their joint savings. "I think she realizes that with the evidence we have, she doesn't stand a chance," Lance said during one of their meetings. "I suggest we accept her terms and close the case as soon as possible." Garrett nodded. Money wasn't a priority for him. He just wanted a clean break, without lengthy court battles and public scandals. One evening, as he was returning home after a hard shift, his phone rang. It was Mackenzie. "Hi, Garrett," she began without preamble. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know that Evelina is telling everyone at work her version of events. According to her, you controlled her every move, followed her, and then kicked her out of the house because of an innocent conversation with a patient." Garrett sighed. He had expected something like this, but it was still unpleasant to hear that someone was trying to ruin his reputation. Thanks for letting me know, but honestly, I don't care what she says or to whom. I know you're above that, Mackenzie replied. I just wanted you to be aware. And also, she's still living on my couch. She says she's looking for an apartment, but I'm starting to wonder if she's being honest. There was irritation in Mackenzie's voice, and Garrett suddenly felt a surge of sympathy for this woman who had been drawn into their problems. It must be hard for you, he said. That's an understatement, Mackenzie grunted. She acts like a victim, doesn't do any housework, and complains all the time. But the worst thing is her phone calls in the middle of the night. Guess who she calls? Colton? Garrett guessed. Bingo. She thinks I don't know, but the walls in my apartment aren't that thick. Garrett shook his head. Even after everything that had happened, Avelina continued her affair. I'm sorry you had to deal with this. Don't apologize. You're not to blame for her actions, Mackenzie replied. Listen, maybe we should get a coffee sometime? I think we could both use a friendly shoulder to lean on. Garrett was surprised by the offer, but then realized that Mackenzie was right. He really needed some simple human interaction that wasn't related to divorce or work. Sounds good, he replied. When would be good for you? Their first meeting took place in a small cafe on the outskirts of Hudsonville, far from the hospital and other places where they might run into mutual acquaintances. Mackenzie arrived right after her shift, still in her medical uniform, her eyes tired but smiling. Thanks for agreeing to meet, she said, sitting down at a table across from Garrett. I needed to get out of the house. Avelina has turned it into a headquarters for rebuilding her personal life. Phone calls, messages, new clothes. It seems she's serious about continuing her relationship with this Colton guy. Garrett raised his eyebrows in surprise. But wasn't he with his wife? They got off the train together after I showed her the video. Mackenzie shrugged. According to Avelina, he split up with his wife and is now open to new relationships. But I'm not sure that's true. She's been fantasizing a lot lately. They ordered coffee and pastries, and the conversation gradually shifted from Avelina to their own lives. Garrett learned that Mackenzie was from Philadelphia, that she had always wanted to be a doctor but had settled on nursing due to financial difficulties. She had a brother who played in a jazz band in New Orleans and a dog named Jackson, after her father's favorite musician. In turn, he told her about his childhood in Hudsonville, about his parents who had worked their entire lives at the same factory where he now worked, about his love of old motorcycles, which he sometimes restored in his spare time. Surprisingly, they hardly mentioned Avelina or the divorce situation at all during the entire evening. It was just a pleasant conversation between two people who had found common ground and interesting topics to discuss. When it was time to part, Mackenzie asked, "Maybe we can do this again sometime. I enjoyed talking to you." "Me too," Garrett replied sincerely. "Maybe next time we can go out to dinner somewhere." Her face lit up with a smile. "I'd love to." The next few weeks brought significant changes. Garrett and Mackenzie began seeing each other regularly. At first just as friends supporting each other through a difficult time, but then more and more clearly as a couple whose relationship was developing slowly but surely. Aveline, meanwhile, finally moved out of Mackenzie's place, finding a small apartment not far from the hospital. But before she left, she made a scene. "You're seeing my husband?" she shouted, waving her arms. "After everything I told you about him? You're such a hypocrite." "First of all, he's not your husband anymore," Mackenzie replied calmly. "Second, everything you told me about him was a lie, and we both know it. And third, yes, I am dating him because he is a good man who you didn't deserve." Avelina stormed out, slamming the door behind her, and from then on tried to avoid Mackenzie at the hospital, only speaking to her about work matters and always in the presence of other colleagues. The divorce was finalized 2 months after the incident on the train. Garrett received the papers in the mail, signed them, and sent them back to his lawyer. There was no ceremony, no special moment, just the formal end of a marriage that had long since ended in reality. On the day the confirmation from the court arrived, Garrett went out to dinner with Mackenzie. They chose a small Italian restaurant in a neighboring town where they could talk quietly without risk of running into anyone they knew. "How are you feeling?" Mackenzie asked when they sat down at a table by the window. "Now that it's all official." Garrett thought for a moment, twirling the menu in his hands. "It's strange, but I feel relieved. Like I've been carrying a heavy burden for a long time and now I've finally been able to let it go. Yes, there's sadness about the years lost, about what didn't work out, but there's no more constant anxiety, uncertainty, feeling that something is wrong." Mackenzie smiled, covering his hand with hers. "I'm happy for you. You deserve to be happy." "And you?" he asked. "Isn't it strange to be with a man who recently divorced your friend?" "Ex-girlfriend," Mackenzie clarified. "And no, it's not weird, because I got to know the real you, not the image Avelina created. You're a completely different person than she described." They ordered food and wine and spent the evening talking about everything under the sun: work, plans for the future, movies they wanted to see together. At the end of the evening, when they left the restaurant and headed for Garrett's car, he gently took Mackenzie's hand. She didn't pull away, but instead intertwined her fingers with his. They reached the car, and Garrett opened the door for her. Before getting in, Mackenzie paused for a moment, looking into his eyes. "I'm glad we found each other," she said. "Me too," Garrett replied, feeling warmth spread through him, a feeling he had almost forgotten during the last few months of his marriage to Avelina. Avelina sat on the sofa in Mackenzie's apartment, looking at rental listings on her tablet. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. In reality, she had been rereading the same message from Colton for the past 3 hours. "I'm sorry, but I think we need to take a break. My wife has asked me to try again, and for the sake..." Avelina closed her eyes, trying to cope with the bitterness. Colton was her lifeline, her promise of a better life after her divorce from Garrett. She had dreamed of how they would be together once they were both free from their marriages. But reality turned out to be different. He chose to return to his wife, and she was left alone, without a husband, without a lover, living on her friend's couch, who was clearly starting to lose patience. The front door opened, and Mackenzie entered the apartment carrying grocery bags. Avelina quickly locked her tablet screen and forced a smile. "Hi," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Hard day?" Mackenzie nodded, placing the bags on the kitchen table. "Just a typical Tuesday at the hospital. How's the apartment search going?" "Oh, I found a few options." "Good, because we need to talk." There was something in her tone that made Avelina tense up. She sat up straight on the couch, bracing herself for an unpleasant conversation. "About what?" Mackenzie finished with the groceries, closed the refrigerator, and turned to her. Her face was serious but determined. "Avelina, you need to move out. I don't see the point in you staying here with me anymore." Avelina felt the color drain from her face. "Why now? If it's money, I can pay the rent. I can help with expenses. No problem." Mackenzie shook her head, not angrily, just firmly. "It's not that. I'm seeing Garrett." The silence that followed those words was like a silent explosion. Avelina felt the world around her freeze for a few seconds. Her mouth went dry, her breath caught in her throat. "What?" "We've grown closer after everything that's happened. We've talked a lot. It started slowly, but now it's happening. And honestly, there's no point in you living here with me." Avelina jumped up as if she had been struck. Her eyes filled with tears, but it was more pride bleeding out than real emotion. "You're a traitor, a fake. You pretended all this time, pretended you were my friend. You listened to me cry. You saw me broken, and you still went and started dating him." Mackenzie didn't respond, didn't scream, didn't try to defend herself. She just stared at Avelina in silence, like someone who had already come to terms with her choice. "You have 3 days to find a new place to live," she said calmly. "I'll help you with your things if you need it, but you need to be out of here by Friday." Avelina grabbed her phone and tablet, ran out of the living room to the bathroom, the only place in the small apartment where she could be alone, and locked the door. Leaning against the wall, she slowly slid to the floor, feeling tears roll down her cheeks. Garrett and Mackenzie. Mackenzie and Garrett. Her friend and her husband. Her ex-husband, she corrected herself. But did that make the betrayal any less painful? Avelina opened her phone and texted Colton, "I need to talk to you. Urgent." There was no reply. Scrolling through her contacts, she realized she had almost no one to share her problems with. Most of her friends were mutual friends with Garrett, and she had avoided them since the divorce, not wanting to explain what had happened or listen to their opinions. Finally, she tapped the mom contact and took a deep breath before calling. The children's room in her mother's house on the outskirts of Hudsonville was exactly as Avelina remembered it. Small, stuffy, with outdated furniture and memories she would rather forget. The pink walls, the posters of bands that had been popular when she was a teenager, the narrow single bed, it all seemed ridiculous now for a 32-year-old woman. Her mother, Doris Pierce, helped carry the boxes from the car without asking too many questions. Only when they sat down to dinner did she finally ask, "So, what really happened, Avelina? Why did your marriage to Garrett fall apart?" Avelina pushed away her plate, which she had barely touched. "It's complicated, Mom. We grew apart. He became controlling. He checked my expenses and followed me around. I just couldn't live like that anymore." Doris looked at her daughter. Under that penetrating gaze, Aveline felt like a teenager caught in a lie again. "Yes, Mom, it's true," she said insistently, but her voice trembled. Doris sighed as she cleared the table. "I always thought Garrett was a good man, calm, reliable, not like the hot guys you usually liked." Aveline said nothing, helping her mother with the dishes. Yes, Garrett was good. Good, too predictable, too ordinary. Was that why she had started looking for excitement elsewhere? Or was there a deeper reason? Avelina avoided these thoughts as she avoided any form of self-analysis. The evenings at her mother's house dragged on slowly. Avelina spent her time lying on her bed with her phone in her hand, avoiding social media but occasionally giving. Work was the only place where she could escape thoughts of her ruined personal life. Avelina immersed herself in her duties, took on extra shifts, and tried to cross paths with Mackenzie as little as possible. If they happened to be in the same room, their communication was strictly professional, with no hint of their former friendship. Days turned into weeks. Avelina started looking at job listings in other cities. Maybe she should leave Hudsonville, start over somewhere new, where no one knew her, where she wasn't the woman who cheated on her husband. It was on one such evening as she lay in her childhood bedroom looking through job ads in Columbus that she decided to check social media. She usually avoided it, but today her curiosity got the better of her. And then she saw the photo. Garrett and Mackenzie against the backdrop of the sea. Sincere smiles, raised glasses, intertwined hands. The caption read, "Starting over was the best decision of my life." Avelina stared at the screen for several minutes. The phone grew heavy in her hand. Her chest tightened. That picture was a mirror of what could have been, of what she had destroyed with her own hands. For the first time since this whole story began, she allowed herself to face the truth. There was no evil Garrett controlling her every move. There was no chance encounter with a stranger on a train. There was only her, with her desires, her selfishness, and her unwillingness to take responsibility for her actions. Avelina put down the phone and closed her eyes. Inside, the dam finally broke, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Real tears of regret and shame, not theatrical sobs for an audience. "What have I done?" she whispered into the empty room. A year later, Hudsonville had hardly changed, but the lives of those involved in the train incident were no longer the same. Garrett Holloway walked out of the Excelsior Engineering building with a small box of personal belongings. Slung over his shoulder was a new name tag that read Senior Mechanical Engineer, a promotion he had long sought and finally earned thanks to his experience and talent for noticing the smallest details. Mackenzie was waiting for him in the parking lot, leaning against her car. Her short hair had grown out and was now pulled back into a small ponytail. She smiled when Garrett approached and kissed him. "Congratulations on your first day in your new job," she said. "Sure," Mackenzie nodded. "We bought everything we needed yesterday. Oh, and your mom called, asking what flowers I'd like for the wedding. She's very excited." Garrett laughed as he got behind the wheel. "Mom's always like that. She can't wait to see her only son finally get married again." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Mackenzie asked more seriously. "After everything that happened with Avelina?" Garrett looked at her warmly. "More than ready. What we have is real, Mackenzie. I'm not afraid to start over because with you I feel at home." They pulled out of the parking lot and headed for their new home, a small but cozy cottage on the north side of Hudsonville that they had bought together 3 months ago. Garrett had sold the house on Oak Street, not wanting to live among memories of his past marriage. It was a symbolic gesture, closing one chapter of his life and starting a new one. At the same time, 400 miles to the east, in a small clinic in Pittsburgh, Avelina Pierce was finishing her shift. She had been working there for 8 months, ever since she decided to leave Hudsonville and everything that tied her to her past. The move had been difficult, but necessary. The last few weeks at her mother's house had been a catalyst for change. After that night when she saw the photo of Garrett and Mackenzie, something inside her broke and began to heal at the same time. Aveline finally stopped blaming everyone around her and took responsibility for her actions. She requested a transfer to any hospital that would take her and ended up in Pittsburgh, a city big enough to get lost in, but not so big that she felt lost. Today, after finishing her shift, she didn't go home right away but headed to a small cafe near the clinic. There, at a table in the corner, a man was waiting for her. Not Colton, nor anyone who looked like him. It was Tyler, a doctor from the pediatric ward, whom she had started dating 2 months ago. Their relationship had developed slowly, without haste or drama. Avelina was learning to be honest, with herself and with her partner. She was learning to appreciate the simple things that had once seemed boring: quiet evenings at home, talking about work, making plans for the weekend. "How was your day?" Tyler asked when she sat down across from him. "Difficult, but good," Avelina replied with a slight smile. "How about you?" Their conversation lacked the fireworks she had once sought with Colton, but it had something she had truly missed in her marriage to Garrett: genuine presence and attention to the moment. She listened to Tyler, really listened, instead of thinking about the next message or meeting with someone else. That evening, back in her small apartment, Avelina opened her desk drawer and took out the envelope with the photos from her past life. Among them was one taken on her wedding day with Garrett. They were smiling at the camera, young and full of hope for the future. Avelina no longer felt bitterness when she looked at that photo, only a quiet sadness about what might have been if she had made a different choice, if she had appreciated what she had instead of chasing after what she didn't have. She put the photos back in the drawer. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day in which she would continue to learn to live in the present, not run from the past or chase the future. It was a lesson she had learned too late for her marriage to Garrett, but perhaps just in time for herself. In Hudsonville, Garrett and Mackenzie sat on the back porch of their new home watching the sunset. His arm was around her head on his chest. They didn't talk about the past, about trains or betrayals. They talked about the future, their upcoming wedding, their vacation plans, the dog they wanted to adopt from the shelter. And somewhere between them and Pittsburgh, a train was moving along the tracks, carrying passengers who were strangers to each other, to their own stories, resolutions, and new beginnings.